U.S. President Donald Trump is threatening to block the opening of a new bridge linking Windsor, Ontario, and Detroit, Michigan. It's the Gordie Howe Bridge that's supposed to open later this year.
The opening of the nearly $6.5 billion bridge, funded entirely by Canada, is under threat tonight. Donald Trump declaring on social media he will try to block the opening of the Gordie Howe International Bridge.
The Gordie Howe Bridge will connect Windsor, Ontario, and Detroit, and it's set to open this year. But Trump is threatening to block it, claiming the bridge was built with no American materials.
Of the border. Against that backdrop, Trump's warning introduced a level of uncertainty that immediately raised alarms, not just in Ottawa, but in Michigan itself. Political leaders from both parties moved quickly, stressing that blocking or delaying the bridge would not punish Canada so much as it would disrupt Michigan's own economy, supply chains, and job market. Among those voices was former Governor Rick Snyder, who had signed the original 2012 agreement and defended it as a strategic win for the state. He pointed out that Michigan secured long-term revenue from a major international crossing without having to finance its construction up front. Democratic Senator Elissa Slotkin echoed those concerns, warning that canceling or even delaying the project would drive up costs for businesses, weaken supply chain security, and ultimately reduce jobs, framing the issue not as a geopolitical standoff, but as a direct economic risk to Michigan residents. At the local level, Drew Dilkins, the mayor of Windsor, described Trump's comments as part of a broader pattern. He suggested the moment reflected a shift away from what would normally be a cooperative milestone, where leaders from both countries would stand together at the center of a shared project and present it as a symbol of partnership rather than conflict. What made the situation even more complex was the timing. The controversy did not arise in isolation, but alongside broader trade tensions, including disputes over Canadian dairy and alcohol policies, as well as a new trade agreement between Canada and China that sharply reduced tariffs on Canadian canola and opened an estimated $7 billion in export opportunities. Those developments added a geopolitical layer to the bridge debate, raising the possibility that the project was being used as leverage in a wider economic negotiation rather than being judged on its own merits. In the middle of this, Mark Carney took a noticeably different approach. Instead of escalating the rhetoric, he responded directly and calmly, calling Trump and laying out the basic facts of the agreement. The shared ownership structure, the involvement of both Canadian and American workers and materials, and the financial framework that had been in place since 2012. He later described the conversation as positive, reinforcing the idea that the dispute could still be managed through dialogue rather than confrontation. But even as those discussions unfolded, the economic clock kept ticking. Delays carry real costs that extend far beyond political messaging. According to a report by the Anderson Economic Group, postponing the bridge's opening could cost as much as $7 million per week, including roughly $5 million in lost operating revenue and another $2 million tied to customs and plaza operations. Those figures capture only the direct financial impact. They do not fully account for the broader ripple effects across industries that depend on reliable cross-border movement, where even minor disruptions can compound into far larger economic losses. At that point, the story was no longer simply about whether the bridge would open. Construction was nearing completion, and the legal agreements remained intact. The real question had become how far political pressure could go in reshaping a project that had been negotiated, financed, and built over more than a decade, and whether the underlying framework would hold or begin to shift in ways that could redefine one of North America's most important trade corridors. What transformed a tense policy dispute into something far more complicated was not another public statement or a new demand, but the timing of a private meeting that suddenly cast the entire situation in a different light. On the same day Trump issued his warning about blocking the bridge, U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick reportedly met with Matty Moran, the billionaire owner of the Ambassador Bridge. If you want, I can... Seconds later, the owner of the Ambassador Bridge, a direct competitor to the Gordie Howe project. That sequence of events alone was enough to trigger an investigation, adding a new layer of political scrutiny to an already volatile situation. Democrats on the House Oversight Committee, led by Representative Robert Garcia, moved quickly to demand records of the meeting. Their request included any communications between the Commerce Department, the Moran family, and the Trump administration, arguing that decisions involving billions of dollars in infrastructure and international trade should not be shaped by private discussions lacking transparency. The concern was not limited to whether a specific deal had been made. It centered on a broader principle, whether a privately owned competitor could exert direct or indirect influence over the fate of a publicly financed project explicitly designed to introduce competition into a long-dominated corridor. For decades, the Ambassador Bridge has held that dominant position. It generates more than $60 million annually in toll revenue and serves as the primary route for heavy commercial truck traffic between Detroit and Windsor. Because the nearby tunnel does not permit commercial trucks, the bridge has effectively operated as a near monopoly over one of North America's most critical trade crossings. That dominance helps explain why the Moran family has long opposed the construction of a second bridge. Over the years, they invested roughly $30 million in a ballot initiative aimed at requiring statewide voter approval for any new international crossing, an effort that ultimately failed when nearly 60% of voters rejected it. They also pursued multiple legal challenges, including federal lawsuits asserting exclusive rights to build or operate a second crossing. Those efforts consistently failed. Courts repeatedly sided with the governments backing the Gordie Howe project, affirming the legality of the agreements and permits underpinning it. Even during Trump's first term, when advertisements aired urging him to cancel the bridge, the administration allowed construction to proceed and approved funding. That history makes the abrupt shift in tone during his second term far harder to separate from the broader political and economic context in which it emerged. Meanwhile, the financial consequences of delay continued to mount. The $7 million per week estimate from the Anderson Economic Group does not stand alone. It sits atop a complex financing structure that includes loans, bonds, and long-term revenue projections tied to toll collection. Interest expenses alone could reach approximately $25 to $5 million per week, placing additional strain on a project that is already near completion and designed to generate returns over decades, not absorb prolonged short-term disruptions. Those costs would not be distributed evenly. Because Canada financed the project up front, Canadian lenders, businesses, and taxpayers would absorb a significant share of the immediate financial burden. But Michigan would not be insulated. Its 50% ownership stake means that any disruption in revenue or escalation in costs ultimately affects American stakeholders as well. That interconnected financial structure mirrors the broader reality of the project itself. The bridge is not purely Canadian or purely American. It is deeply integrated, reflecting the intertwined economies it was built to serve. Beyond the direct financial losses, the larger economic risks fall on industries that depend on seamless cross-border movement, particularly the automotive sector. In that industry, components often cross the border multiple times during production, making efficiency and reliability essential rather than optional. Agricultural producers, tourism operators, and logistics companies face similar exposure, where even minor disruptions can trigger cascading effects across supply chains, pricing, and product availability in both countries. Despite the turbulence, the long-term outlook for the bridge remains strong. Analysts and industry experts continue to emphasize its strategic importance, pointing to decades of data supporting its role in improving efficiency, reducing congestion, and strengthening economic integration. The design itself reflects those goals. 6 lanes capable of handling a wide range of vehicles, including commercial freight, built to meet future demand rather than merely relieve today's bottlenecks. If you want, Here is the rewritten final section, maintaining the same length, pacing, and structure, with timestamps removed, clean narrative flow, and a strong documentary-style conclusion. No emojis. Seconds, oversized and hazardous material loads, along with 60 primary inspection lanes and 46 commercial secondary inspection bays, creating a high-capacity gateway designed for modern trade demands rather than yesterday's traffic patterns. As the debate continued, Mark Carney maintained a steady and deliberate tone. Instead of escalating rhetoric, He focused on the facts of the agreement and the practical benefits of the project. That approach allowed Canada to present itself as consistent and predictable in contrast to the shifting signals coming out of Washington. While it did not eliminate the underlying tensions, it reinforced the stability of the framework governing the bridge, emphasizing that the legal agreements, ownership structure, and financial model remain intact regardless of political pressure. At the same time, leaders in Michigan continued pushing back against the idea of using the bridge as leverage in a broader trade dispute. They highlighted the direct consequences for their own state's economy and the importance of preserving reliable infrastructure in a region that functions as a backbone for North American trade. Their response underscored a reality often lost in geopolitical narratives. Decisions framed as national strategy can have immediate and deeply local consequences, affecting jobs, businesses, and communities in tangible ways. The numbers began to tell a story that went beyond politics. Roughly 8,000 trucks are expected to use the bridge each day, along with an estimated 6,000 Canadians crossing into Detroit for work. That steady flow of people and goods reflects